Hey folks, just before we begin, this video is sponsored by Raycon because I know what you're thinking. My sexy voice in your ears through these slick, comfortable wireless earbuds? Stick around until the end of the video to hear all about these bad boys.
Someday though, this tree will die, and so will you. Maybe you won't die of old age like her, but the thing you're holding on to, that last breath of humanity, will vanish as soon as the blood does. What do you want? Same thing you do? A future?
I think there is something to be admired about Daybreakers' ambition. Its execution certainly left a lot to be desired for what was at least a very unique and inspired premise about vampires searching for a blood substitute amidst a global human shortage that threatens their very existence. In fact, I think Ethan Hawke best summarised the film. It's a thoughtful, if rudimentary, commentary on greed, resource management, and humanity's ungrateful treatment of the world, presented as a low-art popcorn flick. The truth is, Daybreakers doesn't really know what it wants to be, and ends up indecisively doing the bare minimum of both extremes. It gives us snippets of intriguing, mildly satirical world building with horrific undertones, while splicing in silly action set pieces to keep the masses from feeling patronised.
We're the folks with the crossbows.
It's actually a pretty good example of serviceably pretentious schlock, because while it does have a mature premise, it doesn't fully commit to it or say anything of true value, and by the end it's really just another cliché action-adventure about finding a cure to stop another apocalypse. But that's not to say there isn't something worth talking about. Daybreakers is set in 2019, 10 years after the world collapsed as the result of a plague spread by a single bat, causing the vast majority of the population to turn into vampires who can no longer go out into the sunlight. I know, sounds very familiar. However, due to the growing shortage of humans to harvest as they near extinction, a big evil pharmaceutical company is looking to invent an artificial blood substitute so that the population deprived of human blood do not mutate into fully vampiric bat-like creatures known as subsiders. Soon the company's leading hematologist Edward Dalton, a disillusioned vampire who is sympathetic to humans, is recruited to research and develop a cure with a small group of survivors led by Willem Dafoe's Elvis, a former vampire who miraculously overcame the disease when exposed to just enough sunlight. Now, as a teenager, I thought this movie was a work of genius, but as an adult, it doesn't hold up well to scrutiny, because when a story accentuates such attention-calling allegorical world-building like this, it inevitably opens a Pandora's box of logical questioning and contradictions that are usually best avoided by giving the audience only subtle implications and fragments to work on. Daybreakers tries to create a similar intensity to 30 Days of Night, which released 2 years before it, by having this dark, gloomy, visceral quality that doesn't really fit the tone of the story it's trying to tell. It tries to present its story as a somber exploration of the ethics and corruption within the pharmaceutical industry, as it introduces concepts of human experimentation, controlling the market and distribution of pharmaceuticals at the expense of public health, and shades of social deprivation as those who cannot afford expensive medication, represented as human blood, are doomed to become sick and die as the vicious cycle continues. There's even something to be said about the human harvesting essentially being a metaphor for the inhumane treatment of animals during slaughter, and as I already said, the ungrateful and wasteful treatment of natural resources. On paper, it sets up a remarkably complex, challenging, and urgent narrative that could absolutely work if given the time to really develop these concepts, but what's there is ultimately surface level at best because, pardon the pun, the pacing moves like a bat out of hell and its emphasis on action overshadows any truly meaningful focus. In fact, if anything, it undermines the attempt at a genuinely serious message, as it literally bites off more than it can chew, pun definitely intended, although the idea of blood being the commodity that's slowly running out does have a strong symbolic resonance, as it drives home our inherent ignorance and how quick we are to riot at the mere idea of rationing or controlling resources most of us don't typically think about on a moral level. I mean, the scene where everybody loses their shit because they don't get enough blood in their coffee is hilariously satirical, but also painfully true. Because I can just imagine people going absolutely postal if they didn't get sugar in their morning coffee, or, you know, be unable to panic buy toilet roll or whatever. Anyway, it's that scene in particular that makes me think the film could have done with a more self-aware satirical overtone to lighten how much of a moody bitch it is most of the time. While I do admire its combination of classical gothic vampires with futuristic neo-noir, I still find its stylization partially conflicting because for every accentuated feature like the cars or houses, there are a lot of generic things that make the heavily stylized elements feel a little displaced. I know that's such a stupid specific nitpick, but it makes it feel aesthetically incomplete and simply reinforces the narrative's unsure vision.
This is one fucking ugly house.
Although I guess you could say the rationale for it is that it's meant to contrast this oppressive, gloomy Soviet totalitarian-esque corporate city with the bright, spacious freedom of the old Wild West of the outdoors. So in that regard, all the generic stuff is meant to represent the former world, while all the heavily stylized stuff is meant to represent the vampires building over it, presenting it as a sort of new world order, you could say. However, it's pretty black and white about its moral conflict, because it doesn't present this new world order as anything but evil, unlike say Richard Matheson's I Am Legend, in which lone human survivor Robert Neville comes to the eventual realization that humanity is no longer the dominant species, and the vampires are now the normalized, natural way of life. I know it tries to show that there are other human sympathizers like Edward out there, but the only other character they show is this senator who barely gets any screen time before being butchered off screen. Again, let me stress, it's still a very enjoyable B-movie, but the overarching indecisiveness of its tone makes it difficult to ever truly feel immersed in its world. I actually think the contrast between Willem Dafoe and Ethan Hawke's performances cements a large portion of the issue, because here are two seasoned professional actors known for their complex and diverse performances, but they both have very different interpretations of the material. Dafoe hams it up and embraces the B-movie qualities by bringing a bit of tension-breaking charisma that's then suppressed by Hawke's coldly monotone effort to take the material as seriously as possible. To their credit, they are valid performances given the lack of material they have to work with, but more so conceptually, they play off each other quite well given both characters seemingly represent polar opposites of life's fragility. One has been reborn and has a newfound appreciation for life after years of living recklessly, while the other has an undercurrent of apathy and depression as he seeks a purpose to keep living since he never chose to be a vampire, as it was forced upon him by his brother so that he would not die in the plague. By the way, side tangent, while the film is very vague about the plague itself, it suggests that vampirism was the only solution to survive it because it would make the population immune to it, but at the expense that they would need to harvest human blood to survive. Now, initially I felt there was a logic hole in this explanation because the issue of needing to harvest humans at such an aggressive rate without any consideration for the ramifications like a blood shortage seemed like a tremendous oversight. I mean, you would think given how morally corrupt the pharmaceutical company is anyway, they would also be focused on reproduction and forced breeding, which I know is really messed up, but at least that way it would have doubled down on the film's constant use of real-world themes by introducing the issue of trying to get endangered animals to reproduce to avoid extinction. However, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the lack of forethought, or well, the illusion of a lack of forethought, is depressingly accurate. On the one hand, it's merely down to human ignorance as suggested when Edward rebukes his brother for being a human hunter when humans are near extinction, and his brother's response is, well, there will always be more. We have this unhealthy assumption that things will just figure themselves out, and more resources will be found eventually despite us going through them at such an alarming rate that reproduction simply can't keep up with it. But on the other hand, one of the film's final twists is that the pharmaceutical company had a blood substitute ready to go this entire time, but wanted to incite panic so that they could profit off supply and demand. And while you would think after Edward discovers a cure that's easy to replicate would surely solve everybody's problem, well, as the company's CEO explains, if there's a cure, then there is no business. It's just a shame that the film never formally addresses it in a nuanced manner, because as I said in the beginning, it doesn't fully commit to its premise, before wanting to splice in some action, which in this case literally happens when a subsider interrupts the brothers' debate and the issue is never brought up again. It's like the film wants to preach to the audience, but then backs itself into a corner when it realizes it doesn't know anything other than generic blanket statements, and goes, hey, quickly, what's that over there? Ah, Willem Dafoe has a kick-ass crossbow! Now, for the film to satisfy a lot of these themes purely on an emotional level, a good portion of it rests on our understanding of the central antagonist Charles Bromley, played by Sam Neill. Like with Elvis and Edward, Charles is conceptually quite an interesting character, because underneath his evil cliché corporate businessman persona, Sam Neill elevates the limited material to hint at a potentially sympathetic character. Charles actually harbours characteristics similar to both Edward and Elvis. On the one hand, he's grown cold and apathetic towards the world, but his hatred is towards humans rather than vampires. And on the other hand, he has a newfound appreciation for life as a vampire because it saved him from dying of cancer as a human. So what you have is this negative parallel to Edward and Elvis, somebody who sees the value in vampirism and its necessity to keep the world turning. The only problem is, however, since the film clearly establishes that vampirism is objectively bad, you aren't really given the choice to empathize with his perspective. The only plot point it uses to reason with him is his estranged daughter who, like Edward, refused to become a vampire and ended up avoiding transformation. This is probably my most egregious issue with the story because it is potentially the most emotionally compelling part of the film. The daughter ultimately has the exact same purpose as Edward's brother. Neither of them are characters. They're props to facilitate the illusion that Edward and Charles are more complex than they really are. Both the daughter and Edward's brother are effectively the story's obligatory tragic deaths. And yes, while the brother has a bit more weight to it because he goes through some resemblance of a character arc, the daughter's appearance is ultimately redundant because it doesn't truly enlighten Charles's character or have any real impact on the story. Instead, when she's captured, Charles tries to reason with her and tries to explain why becoming a vampire is the best option, but she ends up making herself a subsider because vampires can't drink their own blood because it's poisonous or something, and so she's then euthanized during a subsider purge. While it does suggest he feels guilt, all he ends up doing is simply repressing it and becoming more hateful, which is fine contextually, but it has no effect on anything else going forward. All her death really does is make Edward's brother regretful for his actions after he sees the public act cruel and barbaric towards what are effectively the sick, but he doesn't spend enough time with her to make me buy how much of an emotional revelation this is supposed to be. In drawing to a close, for as negative as these criticisms are, I do want to again stress that Daybreakers' ambition is still a welcome change from the familiar Hollywood affair. In many respects, it's still a frank allegory about pharmaceuticals, greed, corruption, and human ignorance, and it uses one of the horror genre's most iconic and profound creatures to creatively demonstrate these issues. My problem is that it's just so trigger happy with implementing as many social issues as it can that it dilutes its ability to go any further beyond the idea, and that's on top of its disruptive, if indeed fun, action storyline that doesn't cohesively synergize with the drama it's built around. I honestly think it just lacks an emotional core to really propel it. I think there are moments of heart projected by the actors, but its world is indicative of how it left me feeling. It's cold and apathetic, but deep down, buried in the darkness, is a glimmer of human spirit. Hey, if you enjoyed this video and want to listen to future content from me in the most affordable, non-intrusive way possible as the world burns down around you, then I highly recommend Raycon's lightweight, brilliantly sounding everyday E25 earbuds. These little monsters are a brilliant alternative to evil hazardous wires and heavy contraptions that feel like having a bear trap on your head, as they sit perfectly in my big fat ears and wirelessly charge up to 4 times on a single charge in this cute little case, along with having several different bud sizes so you can find what best suits your ears. The everyday E25 earbuds also have 6 hours of playtime, seamless Bluetooth pairing, more bass, and a more compact design that gives you a nice noise isolating fit to block out all the screaming eldritch demons trying to possess you. What, surely I can't be the only one. What year is this? Raycon earbuds start at about half the price of any other premium wireless earbuds on the market and sound just as awesome as any other top audio brand you know. So go to buyraycon.com/Ryan by clicking the link in the description box below to get 15% off your order. And until next time, while you're ordering your cheeky headphones, stay safe and I'll see you all very soon. Bye!